The rain was merciless that night in San Francisco, falling in silver sheets against the marble steps of the Reed mansion. Emily Carter, trembling and 7 months pregnant, stood barefoot on the porch clutching a torn suitcase. Her husband, Daniel Reed, towered in the doorway, his tailored Armani shirt open at the throat, eyes full of disgust. "I told you, Emily," he hissed, shoving her hard enough that she stumbled onto the wet stone. "You and that thing inside you are a liability. I can't have a crying wife ruining my image." Lightning split the sky, revealing his mistress Vanessa behind him, the same woman who used to be Emily's best friend. Vanessa smirked, holding a glass of red wine like she was watching a scene from a bad movie. "Maybe now you'll understand your place," she said softly, her tone cutting deeper than the cold. Emily's tears mixed with the rain. "You promised me, Daniel," she whispered. "We built this together. I gave you everything." He laughed, cruel and hollow. "You gave me nothing but a mistake." Then the door slammed, locking her out of the life she once called home. Emily stood frozen, the wind whipping her soaked hair across her face. Her suitcase burst open, scattering baby clothes across the driveway. Tiny onesies, a small blanket embroidered with hope. She fell to her knees, gathering them with trembling hands. The storm howled louder, thunder rolling like a warning. Her phone vibrated in her pocket. A message from Daniel. "Don't come back. Ever." Her vision blurred, her legs gave out. She pressed both hands to her stomach. "It's okay, babies," she whispered through chattering teeth. "Mommy's got you. We'll be okay." A pair of headlights pierced the darkness. A sleek Bentley Continental rolled to a stop beside her. The tinted window slid down, and a man's deep, steady voice broke through the storm. "Miss, are you all right?" Emily blinked, squinting through the rain. A tall man stepped out, umbrella in hand, his black coat glistening under the streetlight. He was in his late 30s, sharp-featured, the kind of presence that made the chaos around him still. When his eyes met hers, something in him shifted. For a heartbeat, he forgot to breathe. Her face, pale, rain-soaked, terrified, looked exactly like Isabella, the wife he had buried 2 years ago. Emily tried to speak but only managed to whisper, "Please, I don't have anywhere to go." The man hesitated, his jaw tightening with emotion he hadn't felt in years. Then he extended his hand. "Come with me," he said. "You're safe now." Emily stared at him, confused, desperate, afraid. Yet something in his voice made her believe. She took his hand. As the car door closed behind her and the storm drowned out the world, she caught a glimpse of his face under the dim light. The billionaire Alexander Heirs, whose name she had only seen in headlines. And that night, in the middle of a storm, 2 broken lives quietly collided, and nothing would ever be the same again. When Emily opened her eyes, the first thing she felt was warmth. Soft linen sheets, the faint scent of sandalwood, and the rhythmic sound of rain against glass. For a brief moment she thought she was dreaming, until she saw the unfamiliar chandelier above her, and the elegant marble fireplace burning softly across the room. She tried to sit up but gasped, clutching her stomach. A nurse in a navy uniform rushed to her side. "Easy, ma'am," she said gently. "You're safe. Mr. Heirs brought you here." "Mr. Heirs?" Emily murmured, still dazed. Before the nurse could answer, the door opened, and he walked in. Alexander Heirs, wearing a dark wool coat and carrying a mug of coffee. The kind of man whose presence filled the room, even when he said nothing. "You fainted in the rain," he said simply, placing the cup on the nightstand. "You were freezing. My doctor checked on you. Your babies are stable." Emily blinked. "Babies?" Alexander's expression softened. "Yes, 4 heartbeats. The doctor confirmed it this morning." The words struck her like thunder. "4?" Her voice broke. "I didn't know." He nodded. "It's rare, but possible. You're very lucky." Tears rolled down her cheeks. "Lucky," she whispered. "That's not how I'd describe it." Alexander didn't reply. He studied her quietly, noticing the bruises fading along her jawline, the fear in her eyes, the way she kept one hand protectively over her belly. Something inside him, something long buried, stirred. She looked exactly like Isabella. The same delicate features, the same brown hair, even the way she tucked a strand behind her ear when nervous. For a second he almost said her name, but the pain of memory stopped him. "Why did you help me?" Emily asked softly. "You didn't even know me," he exhaled. "Because I couldn't just drive away." His tone was steady but carried a quiet ache. "And because you reminded me of someone I lost." Silence hung between them. The rain outside softened to a drizzle, and in the distance the city lights shimmered across San Francisco Bay. Emily stared out the window. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "Whoever she was, she must have been special." "She was," he replied after a pause. "My wife, she died in a car accident 2 years ago. We tried for years to have children, but fate had other plans." Emily lowered her eyes. "I lost everything tonight," she said. "My home, my husband, my dignity." He looked at her, something protective flickering in his eyes. "You haven't lost everything. You're still alive, and so are your children." His words broke something inside her. For the first time in months, she felt seen, not as a failure, not as a burden, but as a person. "Rest," he said quietly, turning toward the door. "The guest room is yours for as long as you need it. No one will hurt you here." When he left, Emily lay still, staring at the ceiling. His kindness terrified her more than Daniel's cruelty, because she didn't know if she could trust kindness anymore. Downstairs, Alexander stood before the large portrait of Isabella hanging above the grand piano. The rainlight glowed over her painted face. He whispered, "What are you trying to tell me, Bella? Why did I find her tonight?" He poured himself a glass of scotch, but the taste was bitter. The past and the present blurred, and for the first time in years, he felt something dangerously close to hope. Upstairs, Emily touched her stomach, whispering to the tiny lives inside her. "Maybe," she said softly, "we just met someone who'll help us find our way." Outside, the storm finally ended. And inside that house on the hill, two souls haunted by loss began the slow, uncertain journey toward healing, one heartbeat at a time. The next morning, the mansion was quiet, except for the soft hum of rainwater dripping from the gutters. Emily woke to the smell of fresh coffee and the faint melody of a piano drifting from downstairs. She followed the sound, barefoot, holding the railing for balance. In the grand living room, Alexander Heirs sat at a glossy black Steinway piano, playing a haunting tune that wrapped around the air like a memory. He didn't notice her at first. His eyes were closed, his fingers trembling slightly as they moved across the keys. Emily stopped halfway down the staircase, transfixed. There was grief in the melody, but also love, the kind that never really dies. When he finally saw her reflection in the piano's lid, his hands froze. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I didn't mean to interrupt." He shook his head, composing himself. "You didn't. That song was my wife's favorite. I only play it when the rain reminds me of her." She stepped closer, her voice barely audible. "You must have loved her very much." He looked at her, really looked at her, and the resemblance struck him again. Same soft brown eyes, same small curve of a smile. It was like time had folded in on itself. "Yes," he said quietly, "more than I ever thought I could love anyone." Emily lowered her gaze, guilt flashing across her face. "I shouldn't be here. I've already caused enough damage in someone else's life. I can't invade yours too." "You're not invading anything," he said firmly. "You needed help, and maybe," his voice faltered, "maybe I needed to be reminded that the world still gives second chances." Her eyes filled with tears. "You don't even know me." "I know pain when I see it," Alexander said softly, "and I know what it's like to lose everything in one night." The words hung heavy between them. Emily turned toward the window, watching the fog lift from the bay. "My husband, he wasn't always cruel. We built his company together. I believed in him, and he betrayed that belief," Alexander said. She nodded. "He said I was a burden, that I ruined his image, but all I ever wanted was love." Alexander studied her profile, the fragility mixed with quiet strength. For a moment, the ache in his chest wasn't just grief anymore. It was something new, something dangerous. He cleared his throat. "Emily, I want you to stay here until you're ready. There's no rush. The world outside can wait." She hesitated. "Why would you do that for me?" He met her eyes. "Because someone once saved me when I was falling apart. Now it's my turn." Emily's lips parted, but no words came. The kindness in his voice felt foreign, almost painful, after so many months of cruelty. When she finally spoke, her voice cracked. "Thank you, but I don't want to be anyone's charity." "You're not," he said gently. "You're a survivor." Silence filled the room again. The fire crackled, casting gold light across her pale face. Alexander reached for a framed photograph on the piano, Isabella smiling beneath a cherry blossom tree. He turned it toward Emily. "She had your eyes," he said, "the same light. But you're not her. Don't think I'm asking you to be. Emily swallowed hard. I'm not sure who I am anymore. He nodded slowly. Then maybe this is where you find out. For the first time in months, Emily allowed herself to exhale. Somewhere deep inside, beneath the fear and exhaustion, a tiny spark of hope flickered. As she left the room, Alexander watched her go, his reflection fading beside Isabella's portrait. And in that quiet morning light, the billionaire realized something terrifying. The woman he rescued might be the one who could save him back. The days passed quietly inside the Heirs mansion, wrapped in the hush of luxury and restraint. Emily began to regain color in her cheeks, though nightmares still woke her at night. Daniel's voice, the slam of a door, the storm outside their old house. Alexander hired a private security team to patrol the perimeter, but he didn't tell her. He just wanted her to rest, to heal, to breathe again. Yet even he could sense it. The calm felt too fragile, too temporary. One morning, Emily sat on the balcony, wrapped in a soft wool blanket, sipping tea. The city stretched below her in layers of mist. She almost felt human again. Then her phone buzzed on the table. Unknown number. You can't hide forever. Her hand went cold. She stared at the message, her heart racing. The text vanished seconds later, deleted remotely. She froze. Only one person could do that. Downstairs, Alexander was reviewing documents in his office when he heard the soft creak of the stairs. Emily stood in the doorway, pale and trembling. Someone found me, she whispered. He knows I'm alive. Alexander rose immediately. Show me. When she handed him the phone, his expression hardened. This man, your husband, how powerful is he? He owns a tech company, Reed Systems, she said. He knows how to track people, erase data. He has friends in law enforcement. Alexander's jaw tightened. Not anymore. He's not going to touch you again. That night, the mansion transformed. Security cameras glowed faintly along the gates, 2 men guarded the entrance, and Alexander's longtime bodyguard, Mason, slept outside Emily's door. But she couldn't sleep. Every gust of wind against the window made her flinch. At 2 a.m., she wandered downstairs and found Alexander in his study, a single lamp casting warm light over the mahogany desk. He was reading through her medical reports. Couldn't sleep, he asked without looking up. She hesitated. Neither could you. He glanced at her then, noticing the fear beneath her exhaustion. He's not getting near you again, he said quietly. I promise. Emily shook her head, tears glistening. You can't protect me forever, Mr. Heirs. He's not just dangerous, he's obsessed. Alexander stood and walked closer, his voice calm but sharp. Emily, look at me. You're safe here. I've dealt with men like him all my life. Bullies in suits, cowards with power. They all break when someone stands up to them. Her eyes searched his face, half in disbelief, half in awe. Why are you doing this? You barely know me. He sighed. Maybe because I see too much of myself in you. Losing everything changes a person. It teaches you to fight differently. A moment of silence passed between them, fragile but electric. Then Mason entered the room, tension etched across his face. Sir, we found a car parked outside the lower gate. No plates. Someone's watching the property. Alexander's expression darkened. Call the police. Now. Emily clutched her stomach, feeling her baby shift as fear surged through her. Alexander took her hands gently. They're not going to hurt you, he said. Not on my watch. She nodded, tears spilling silently. I just want this to stop, she whispered. I just want my children to be born in peace. Alexander's voice softened. They will be. I'll make sure of it. Outside, flashing lights cut through the fog as police cars arrived. The intruder was gone, but his message lingered, a chilling promise that Daniel wasn't finished. As the night fell silent again, Alexander stood by the window, jaw clenched. He wants a war, he muttered. Then we'll give him one. And for the first time, the billionaire wasn't protecting a stranger. He was defending something that finally felt like home. Morning sunlight filtered through the high windows of the Heirs mansion, turning the marble floors gold. The storm had finally passed, but the fear still clung to Emily's chest like fog that refused to lift. Alexander insisted she get a full medical checkup, and today was the day. Dr. Evelyn Hart, a calm woman with decades of experience, set up her portable ultrasound in the master suite. Emily lay on the bed, nervous, while Alexander stood near the window, arms folded, pretending to check emails on his iPhone, but his eyes never left her. Take a deep breath, Dr. Hart said, placing the cold gel on Emily's stomach. Let's see how our little one is doing." Emily winced slightly but smiled. The room filled with the rhythmic sound of a single heartbeat, soft and steady. Then another, and another. Dr. Hart frowned, adjusting the sensor. "Wait," she murmured. "There's more." Alexander straightened. "More?" The doctor's eyes widened, a small smile forming. "Mr. Hayes, Miss Carter, you're carrying 4 babies." Emily froze. 4? Dr. Hart nodded. "Quadruplets, all with strong heartbeats. It's extremely rare but possible, especially if it runs in the family." Emily burst into tears. Her hands trembled as she stared at the monitor, where 4 tiny shapes flickered like stars. 4 lives, she whispered. 4 miracles. Alexander stepped closer, unsure what to do. He wasn't a man who comforted easily. He had built empires, not hearts. But seeing her cry for joy after everything broke something inside him. He reached out awkwardly, resting a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "They're strong," he said softly. "Just like their mother." She laughed through tears. "Mother, I haven't heard anyone call me that yet." "You'll hear it a lot soon," he said, allowing a rare smile. Dr. Hart printed the ultrasound photos and handed them to Emily. "You'll need strict rest, proper nutrition, and regular checkups. Quadruplets are high risk, but with care, they'll be fine." When the doctor left, the silence felt sacred. Emily stared at the photos, tracing each tiny heartbeat with her fingertip. 4 of them, she murmured. "It's like the universe is giving me back what I lost." Alexander watched her quietly. He remembered Isabella's empty nursery, the little crib that was never used. For 2 years he had closed that room, refusing to face it. But now he felt something he hadn't dared feel: purpose. That evening he walked to that same nursery. Dust floated through the air, glinting in the soft lamplight. He stood in the doorway, gripping the frame until his knuckles went white. Then he called Mason. "Have the room restored," he said. "Everything new. 4 cribs?" Mason hesitated. "Yes, sir. For the children?" "For her children," Alexander corrected. Meanwhile, Emily sat by the fire in the library, wrapped in a cream blanket, sipping warm milk. The mansion no longer felt intimidating. It felt like a sanctuary. She looked up when Alexander entered, carrying a small velvet box. He opened it to reveal a silver pendant in the shape of a heart, engraved with the words "protected by grace." "This belonged to Isabella," he said. "She believed every mother needed a charm for strength. I think she'd want you to have it." Emily's eyes welled with tears. "I can't accept." "Please," he interrupted. "Consider it a promise. You're not alone anymore." For a long moment they just looked at each other. 2 souls battered by loss, standing in the flickering glow of new beginnings. Outside, the rain had stopped completely. The first rays of sunset painted the sky pink and gold. Emily clutched the pendant against her heart and whispered, 4 heartbeats, 4 chances to live again. And Alexander Hayes silently vowed, no one would ever take those lives away. The calm that had wrapped around Emily's world began to crack. For weeks, she lived in quiet routine. Doctor visits, soft music, reading baby books by the fire. Alexander kept his distance, but never too far. She would often bouquet of white lilies waiting by her breakfast tray, or a new pair of warm slippers left by the door. But peace, she was learning, never lasts long when evil still remembers your name. That morning, Alexander had driven to a board meeting at Hayes Group headquarters on Market Street. Emily stayed home, sketching nursery ideas on her MacBook Air, while Mason and the house staff handled deliveries. Around noon, a delivery van appeared at the gate. The guard checked the papers. Everything looked normal. Minutes later, the doorbell rang. Emily opened the door halfway, expecting a package. Instead, a familiar voice cut through her like ice. "Miss me, sweetheart?" Daniel Reed stood there, soaked from the drizzle, his smile sharp as broken glass. He looked thinner, more dangerous, eyes red from sleepless nights and rage. Emily's blood ran cold. How did you find me?" He stepped inside without invitation, scanning the grand foyer. "You really traded up, didn't you? Hiding in some billionaire's mansion while I take the blame for your little stunt." "Get out," she whispered. "Please, Daniel." He smirked. "Not until we talk. Those babies you're carrying, they're mine. You think you can just keep them from me? They're my legacy." Emily backed away, one hand on her belly. "You lost the right to call them yours the night you hit me." His face twisted. "You think some rich man can save you? He'll get bored." "They always do." A voice behind him interrupted, low and lethal. "Funny, I'm not bored yet." Daniel turned. Alexander stood at the top of the staircase, coat draped over one shoulder, expression carved from stone. Mason appeared behind him, hand resting on the holster at his belt. "Mr. Reed," Alexander said evenly, "you've just trespassed on private property. I suggest you leave before this becomes unpleasant." Daniel's laugh was brittle. "Unpleasant? You think money scares me? You think I don't know who you are, Mr. Hayes? The widower billionaire with a hero complex." Alexander descended the stairs slowly, eyes locked on him. "You should choose your next words carefully." Daniel lunged forward, grabbing Emily's wrist. She cried out. In one swift motion, Alexander shoved Daniel back, pinning him against the wall. "You ever touch her again," he growled, "and I'll personally make sure you disappear from every boardroom in America." Daniel struggled, but Mason had already drawn his gun halfway. Alexander let go just as the police sirens echoed outside. The guards had already called them. Daniel glared at Emily, voice shaking with fury. "This isn't over. You'll regret crossing me." As officers let him out, Alexander turned to Emily. She was trembling, face pale as porcelain. He reached for her gently. "You're safe now." But she shook her head, tears spilling down. "No, I'm not. He'll come back. He always does." Alexander's jaw tightened. "Then I'll be ready." That night, he couldn't sleep. He stood by the window, staring at the reflection of the city lights across the bay. The monster had returned, and for the first time in years, Alexander felt something he hadn't felt even in the corporate wars he'd fought. Fear. Not for himself, but for her. Down the hall, Emily curled up in bed, clutching the pendant he'd given her. She whispered to her unborn children, "Mommy will keep you safe." But outside, far beyond the iron gates, Daniel Reed sat in his car, eyes burning in the dark. And as lightning flashed across the bay, the battle for her future had only just begun. The night after Daniel's intrusion, the mansion felt different, too quiet, like the air itself was holding its breath. Rain fell again, tapping softly against the tall windows. Emily couldn't sleep. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Daniel's face, heard his voice whispering threats. Downstairs, the faint crackle of a fireplace glowed from the study. She followed the light, clutching her robe, her bare feet silent on the marble floor. Alexander was there, sitting alone by the fire, a tumbler of whiskey untouched in his hand. His white shirt sleeves were rolled up, his expression distant, haunted. He looked up as she entered. "You should be resting." "I couldn't," she admitted softly. "Every sound feels like him coming back." Alexander gestured to the seat across from him. "Then sit, the fire helps." She did. The warmth wrapped around her like a fragile promise. For a long while, they just listened to the rain. "You've faced him before," he said quietly. "Haven't you?" Emily stared into the flames. "Too many times. He used to tell me I made him angry, that I forced him to hurt me. I believed him, until one night I realized it was all about control. He couldn't stand not owning me." Her voice trembled, but she didn't cry. She had no tears left. Alexander leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "You don't belong to anyone. Not anymore." She looked at him, searching. "Why do you care so much? You barely know me, yet you risk everything to protect me." "Why?" He hesitated, his jaw tightening. The firelight flickered across his face, revealing the cracks beneath the stoic mask. "Because once, someone saved me when I didn't think I deserved saving." She frowned. "Your wife?" He nodded slowly. "Isabella found me when I was just a broken man with too much money and no purpose. She gave me peace, and then one car accident took her away." His voice cracked, a sound she'd never heard from him before. "When I saw you that night in the rain, I thought I was seeing her ghost. But it wasn't her. It was you. The same strength, the same fire to survive." Emily's throat tightened. "I'm not her, Alexander. I know." He met her eyes. "But helping you, it gave me a reason to breathe again." They sat in silence. The fire hissed softly. After a long pause, Emily whispered, "I'm sorry for your loss." He gave a faint smile. "You've already made it mean something." Outside, thunder rolled across the bay. Emily flinched at the sound, instinctively pressing a hand to her stomach. Alexander noticed and stood, walking to the cabinet. He returned with a folded blanket. "Here," he said, draping it gently over her shoulders. His hands brushed her hair, a touch so careful it felt almost reverent. "Do you ever stop trying to protect people?" she asked, half teasing, half sincere. He shrugged lightly. "Only the ones worth protecting." For a moment, the world narrowed to the soft rhythm of rain and the glow of the fire. Emily could feel his gaze lingering, steady, kind, but filled with something unspoken. She shifted, nervous. "If Daniel comes back, I won't run this time." Alexander's eyes hardened. "You won't have to. He'll find out soon enough what happens when a man like him underestimates someone I care about." Her heartbeat quickened. "Someone you care about?" He paused, then smiled faintly. "Yes, someone I care about." The silence that followed was not uncomfortable. It was electric. For the first time, Emily didn't feel like a guest in his house. She felt like she belonged there. And as the fire burned low, neither of them realized it. But the line between savior and soulmate had just begun to blur. The morning started quietly, too quietly for what was about to come. Emily woke to the soft rhythm of rain against the window. Again the rain, always the rain, as if the sky itself refused to let her forget where her story began. She tried to sit up, but pain sliced across her abdomen like fire. Her breath hitched. Something was wrong. Mason heard her cry from the hall and rushed in. "Miss Carter? What's happening?" Emily's voice trembled. "The babies, something's wrong, She gasped, clutching her belly. The sheet beneath her darkened. Within seconds, Mason called for Alexander. The billionaire, who had just stepped out of a morning conference call, dropped his phone mid-sentence and ran upstairs 2 steps at a time. He found her doubled over, sweat on her forehead, tears in her eyes. "Get Dr. Hart, now," he barked. The house became chaos. The doctor arrived within minutes, her portable monitor in hand, the sound of 4 tiny heartbeats filling the room like a fragile symphony. "They're early," Dr. Hart said urgently. "We need to get her to St. Mary's. Now." Alexander didn't hesitate. He wrapped his coat around Emily, ignoring the rain that had begun to pour again. Mason pulled the car to the front, a black Mercedes S-Class, engine humming like thunder. On the way, Emily gripped Alexander's hand so tightly he thought his bones might break. "I can't lose them," she whispered. "Please, don't let me lose them." He looked at her, rain and fear reflected in her eyes, and said firmly, "You won't. I swear it." The car cut through the wet streets of San Francisco like a blade. Horns blared, lights flashed, but all Alexander heard was the sound of her labored breathing and the soft, fading rhythm of those 4 tiny hearts on the monitor. At the hospital, nurses rushed her into the delivery room. Alexander followed, refusing to stay behind despite every protocol. "She's not alone," he said through clenched teeth. "She's not doing this alone." Dr. Hart gave quick orders. "We'll need an emergency C-section. The baby's heart rates are dropping." Emily caught Alexander's sleeve before they could separate her. "If something happens to me?" He silenced her with a look. "Don't finish that sentence." Tears streaked her face as she whispered, "Promise me you'll tell them I loved them." His voice broke for the first time. "You'll tell them yourself?" Moments later, the sterile brightness of the operating room swallowed her. Machines beeped. Hands moved quickly. Alexander waited outside the glass, fists clenched, every second dragging like an hour. Then a cry. One high, tiny cry that shattered the silence. Then another, and another, and another. 4 cries. 4 lives. The nurses moved swiftly, placing each baby into clear bassinets under glowing warmers. Emily was pale, barely conscious, but her eyes fluttered open when she heard them. "Are they?" "They're perfect," Dr. Hart said, smiling through tears. "All 4 of them." Alexander stepped into the room, gown and mask on, trembling as he approached the incubators. He looked at the smallest baby, barely the size of his hand, and for the first time in years, he felt tears burn his eyes. Emily whispered weakly, "Their names: Hope, Noah, Liam, and Grace." He nodded, repeating each name like a prayer. Hope, Noah, Liam, Grace. When he turned to her, she was fading fast. "Stay with me, Emily," he pleaded. "You did it, they're here." She smiled faintly. "Tell them, their father's gone, but they were born from love, not fear." Her hand slipped from his and alarms began to sound. Doctors surrounded her, shouting orders. Alexander stood frozen, heart pounding in his chest. And then, a pulse, weak but steady. Hours later, as dawn broke over the bay, Emily slept peacefully. The babies were stable. Alexander sat beside her, holding one of the newborns against his chest. He whispered, "You saved me, too." And outside, as the first sunlight touched the hospital windows, the rain finally stopped, as if heaven itself had paused to listen to the cry of 4 new angels. 2 weeks after the birth, the hospital room had turned from chaos to calm. 4 tiny bassinets lined the window, sunlight spilling across the soft blankets where Hope, Noah, Liam, and Grace slept. The rhythmic hum of machines had been replaced by the delicate music of their breathing. Emily was stronger now, though still pale. She watched them constantly, afraid that if she blinked, they might disappear. Alexander came every day, sometimes with flowers, sometimes with silence. He would stand by the window and look at the babies as though they were proof that miracles were real. But peace was a luxury she never got to keep for long. That afternoon, as Alexander reviewed security updates on his tablet, Mason entered with a grim look. "Sir," he said quietly, "someone's filed a petition at the county court." Daniel Reed. Emily's blood ran cold. "What does he want?" Alexander's voice hardened. "Custody. He's claiming the babies are his." Emily shook her head, panic flooding her. "He's trying to use them. He doesn't care about them, Alexander. He just wants control, again." He nodded slowly. "Then we'll take that power away from him, legally and publicly." Within hours, Alexander's legal team assembled at the hospital. Lawyers in gray suits spread documents across a conference table. At the center was one bold proposal, a DNA test to determine the biological father of the 4 infants. Emily felt sick. "I don't need a test to know the truth." Alexander touched her hand gently. "You don't, but we need proof to protect them." The test was done that same day. Swabs, signatures, chain of custody forms, everything official. Alexander stayed beside her, his calm presence keeping her from collapsing under the weight of fear. 3 days later, the results arrived in a sealed envelope. The lawyer handed it to Alexander, who opened it slowly. His face gave nothing away. Then he looked up at Emily, eyes steady. "They're Daniel's children," he said softly. Emily's heart dropped. For a moment, the world tilted. No, it can't be." "It doesn't change anything," Alexander said quickly. "He lost the right to them long ago. But it means they're entitled to something he doesn't want us to know." He turned to Mason. "Get me everything on the Reed family trust." That night, Alexander worked in his home office, surrounded by files, coffee cups, and a storm of old legal documents. Near midnight, he found it, a clause buried deep in a will, drafted by Daniel's late father. In the event of Daniel Reed's legitimate biological heirs being identified, all assets and holdings of Reed Capital shall transfer to said heirs upon verification of DNA and maternal guardianship. Alexander's pulse quickened. "Emily," he whispered. "Your children, they're the rightful heirs." The next morning, he explained it all to her. Emily sat stunned, clutching the pendant around her neck. "You're saying everything, the company, the properties, the accounts, they belong to them?" "Yes," Alexander said. "But Daniel won't let that happen quietly. He'll fight, he'll lie, he'll destroy evidence if he can." Emily looked at her children, 4 tiny lives sleeping peacefully, unaware of the war waiting for them outside those walls. "Then we'll fight back," she said firmly. "For them." Alexander nodded, pride flickering in his eyes. "You've got more strength than you realize." Her lips trembled into a small smile. "Maybe I learned it from watching you." Later, as dusk fell, Emily stood by the window of her hospital room, staring at the skyline. Somewhere out there, Daniel Reed was plotting. But for the first time, she wasn't afraid. She had the truth. She had allies. And she had something Daniel could never buy. A heart unbreakable by greed. And when the world learned who those children truly were, every empire built on lies would begin to crumble. The revelation spread through San Francisco's elite circles like wildfire. 4 infants, heirs to a billion-dollar empire, born to the woman everyone thought was gone. Emily Carter's name suddenly meant power, and power was something Daniel Reed would never surrender without a fight. 3 days after the DNA results were confirmed, Daniel and his mistress, Vanessa Moore, met secretly in a downtown penthouse. The curtains were drawn, the air thick with tension and whiskey. Vanessa paced barefoot across the marble floor, her nerves fraying. "They know, Daniel. That clause in your father's will, your kids get everything. You'll be left with nothing." Daniel slammed his glass down. "Then we change the story. We make sure the world believes those children aren't mine." Vanessa stopped. "How?" "There's proof." He smiled. The kind of smile that had once charmed investors and terrified rivals. Proof can be replaced. Within hours, his lawyers began forging alternate documents, manipulating hospital data, and paying off a low-level court clerk to lose the DNA records. Vanessa handled the PR side, reaching out to gossip outlets under fake names, planting stories about a fraudulent woman exploiting a dead business tycoon's family. When the first article went live, Emily's phone exploded with notifications. Mystery mother fakes billionaire heir scandal. Her hands shook as she scrolled. "They're trying to destroy me," she whispered. Alexander took the phone from her and read in silence. His expression didn't change, but his eyes hardened like steel. "Then we expose them before they bury you." That afternoon, his office transformed into a war room. Mason coordinated with private investigators, tracing every suspicious transaction tied to Daniel's shell accounts. Alexander's top cybersecurity expert began pulling deleted data from the hospital servers. At dusk, a breakthrough. The name of the bribed court clerk. A man in debt, living beyond his means. Alexander called in a favor from an old friend at the district attorney's office. By midnight, they had warrants ready. Meanwhile, Emily sat in the nursery, watching her 4 babies sleep beneath soft, mobile lights. She touched each tiny hand, whispering, "No matter what he does, you'll never belong to his darkness." Downstairs, Alexander watched her through the glass door. Mason approached quietly. "You're going to war for her," he said. Alexander didn't look away. "No," he said softly. "For them. They deserve a life free from monsters." The next morning, federal agents raided the penthouse where Daniel and Vanessa were celebrating prematurely. Laptops, documents, flash drives, everything seized. Vanessa panicked. "Daniel, what's happening?" he sneered. "It's a bluff. Hayes is bluffing." But then he saw the warrant, signed by name Alexander J. Hayes, cooperating witness. Rage flooded his face. "He'll regret this," he hissed. "Both of them will." That night, Alexander returned home to find Emily sitting by the fire, eyes swollen but defiant. "He's trying to erase me," she said. He poured her a glass of water and sat beside her. "He can't erase what's real." "And the truth," he said, tapping his chest, "isn't stored in a file. It's right here, in the lives you created." Emily met his gaze, her voice steady. "Then let's make sure the world sees it." He nodded slowly. "Tomorrow I'll call a press conference. No more silence. No more hiding." She hesitated. "You'd risk your name for mine?" His answer was immediate. "I already have." Outside, the city glowed with restless light. Inside, the storm was gathering again. Not from the sky this time, but from the fury of a man who had lost everything to the woman he once tried to destroy. And as Emily drifted to sleep beside the cradle of her children, she didn't know that Daniel's next move would strike at the very heart of her fragile peace. The morning after the press conference, the world had changed. News outlets replayed clips of Alexander standing beside Emily at the podium, his voice calm but unyielding. "The truth cannot be buried under money or fear. These children are the rightful heirs to Reed Capital." For the first time, Emily's name wasn't whispered in shame. It was spoken with admiration. Yet she couldn't rest. She knew Daniel better than anyone. He wouldn't give up. He would strike back, harder than ever. That afternoon, she sat in the nursery, feeding baby Hope while the others slept. The room was filled with soft lullabies and sunlight. Fragile peace. Then her Apple Watch vibrated. A message appeared from an unknown number. "You still have it, don't you?" The recording. Her breath caught. Recording? It hit her all at once. The night Daniel attacked her, months ago, before she fled. She had worn the watch he'd given her as an anniversary gift. She'd never realized it had an auto-sync voice memo feature. The same watch she'd brought with her when she escaped. "Alexander," she called out, panic rising. He appeared within seconds, reading the message. His face darkened. "He's looking for evidence. That means there is something." Emily handed him the watch. "If there's proof of what he did, it's in there. But I never listened to it. I couldn't." He turned to Mason. "Get my tech team on this, now." An hour later, 3 specialists sat in Alexander's office, laptops glowing. They extracted the audio files hidden deep within the system's encrypted cache. Static, then voices. Daniel's voice filled the room, clear and venomous. "If you ever tell anyone I touched you, I'll make sure no one believes you. You and that thing in your belly are nothing without me." Emily froze. Tears filled her eyes as the file continued. The sound of a slap, the crash of glass, her own broken sobs. Alexander's hands clenched into fists. "That's enough," he said hoarsely. The text fell silent. He walked to the window, trying to calm the fire inside him. "We can use this," he said finally. "This recording alone can end him." Emily wiped her tears. But if we release it, everyone will hear everything. I know, he said gently, and I hate asking that of you, but if you want peace, true peace, he needs to be exposed completely. She hesitated. I'm scared. He turned to her, eyes softening. So am I. But courage isn't about not being afraid, it's about doing it anyway. She met his gaze and nodded. Then let's end this. The next day, Alexander's legal team submitted the audio to the district attorney's office as part of a larger criminal case: assault, coercion, financial fraud, and witness intimidation. When Daniel was served the subpoena, his rage boiled over. In his luxury penthouse, he hurled a glass against the wall. Vanessa tried to calm him, but he turned on her. You were supposed to delete everything. You useless. Don't you dare, she snapped, stepping back. You did this to yourself. Meanwhile, Alexander met with the DA. This evidence is damning, the prosecutor said. But are you ready for what comes next? This will go public. Alexander's jaw tightened. Let it. The world needs to know the kind of man he really is. That night, Emily sat by the fire, listening to her babies breathe in their sleep. The pendant Alexander had given her glimmered softly in the light. He can't hurt us anymore, she whispered. Not with the truth on our side. Alexander watched her from the doorway, silent, proud, and terrified. Because he knew Daniel Reed wasn't the kind of man to go quietly. And somewhere across the city, as the tape spread through the hands of prosecutors and reporters, Daniel began planning his next move, one that would put every life Emily loved at risk. By dawn, San Francisco was buzzing. The recording leaked online before the district attorney's office could even issue a statement. Every major network had it, the voice of Daniel Reed, screaming, threatening, destroying everything he'd spent years pretending to be. Clips played on loop across televisions, in cafes, boardrooms, and taxi radios. If you ever tell anyone I touched you, the words echoed through the city like thunder. Emily sat on the living room couch, clutching her blanket, her heart pounding. The babies slept upstairs, unaware that their cries had been replaced by the roar of headlines. She didn't know whether to feel relieved or sick. Alexander entered the room, phone pressed to his ear. Yes, I've seen it, he said to someone on the line. No, we didn't leak it, but don't take it down. The truth stays. When he hung up, Emily looked at him, wide-eyed. It's everywhere, he nodded. It's out now, and there's no taking it back. Will they hate me? She asked softly. People always hate the woman who speaks first. Alexander sat beside her, his voice firm. They won't hate you, they'll see you for what you are, the woman who survived him. But outside their quiet mansion, Daniel's world was falling apart. In the heart of downtown, Reed Capital's glass tower stood like a monument to arrogance. Inside, chaos reigned. Investors pulled out in waves. His board members refused to take his calls. The PR firm he'd paid millions to manage his reputation had terminated their contract. Daniel burst into the boardroom, his face flushed with rage. Find out who leaked it, he shouted. It had to be Heirs. Vanessa, pale and shaking, stared at her phone. It doesn't matter who leaked it, Daniel. The damage is done. You're finished. He turned on her, eyes blazing. You think you'll survive this? You were part of it. I tried to stop you, she screamed. I told you to let her go. But Daniel wasn't listening anymore. His empire was crumbling, and all he could see was Emily's face on every news broadcast. Fragile yet strong, the image of everything he'd lost control of. That afternoon, reporters swarmed the gates of Alexander's estate. Cameras flashed. Questions flew like bullets. Emily, did you know the recording existed? Alexander, are you romantically involved with her? Do you plan to sue Daniel Reed? Alexander shielded Emily with his arm, guiding her toward the door. No comments, he said calmly, though his eyes burned with fury. Inside, he called Mason. Tighten security. No one gets near her or the children. Later that evening, the DA held a press conference. Charges were announced: aggravated assault, coercion, fraud, and obstruction of justice. Daniel Reed, once a name associated with innovation and wealth, was now a headline synonymous with disgrace. Emily watched the announcement on TV, hands trembling. It's over, she whispered. Alexander looked at her. Not yet. He's desperate. Men like him don't fall quietly. He was right. At midnight, a black SUV pulled up outside the Reed penthouse. Daniel climbed inside, his face hard and cold. In the back seat, a man waited. The same private investigator who had once helped track Emily. "Find her," Daniel ordered. "I don't care what it takes. Bring me something that can destroy her for good." Meanwhile, in the Heirs mansion, Emily stood by the window, looking out at the fog rolling across the bay. The reflection of the baby's bassinets glowed faintly behind her. "I just want peace," she whispered. Alexander joined her, his voice low. "You'll have it. But peace isn't given, Emily. It's taken, and I intend to take it back for you." Their eyes met, firelight flickering between them, two survivors bracing for the next storm. And far across the city, Daniel Reed vowed that if his empire had to burn, he'd drag them into the flames with him. The courtroom smelled of coffee and polished wood, a place where reputations were carved or crushed. On the morning the trial resumed, media vans lined the curb and microphones bristled like impatient flowers. Emily sat in the front row with Alexander beside her. Hands folded, eyes steady, courage quiet. 4 photographs of Hope, Noah, Liam, and Grace rested on an empty gallery shelf where bassinets had been. The prosecution opened with a careful, merciless narrative. The tape, the financial forgeries, the threats. Jurors listened as evidence mounted, receipts, emails, transfers, a timeline of Daniel Reed's escalating cruelty. Alexander's investigators presented witnesses who testified to hush payments, intimidation tactics, and falsified contracts. A former assistant described learning to alter signatures on demand while a cold boardroom watched. The defense called it manipulation and motive questioning, but the evidence refused neat erasure. Mid-trial, the judge allowed a sealed packet to be opened, and the room fell into a hush. Inside were sworn statements from a former Reed Capital executive who admitted forging records under threats. The confession landed like a judgment. Daniel's face lost color, and his composure evaporated. A schoolteacher juror dabbed tears during the tape, and the courtroom felt the weight of named abuse. Then came testimony from a former PR strategist who had spun lies for Reed Capital and now spoke candidly. She described crafted narratives, planted articles, and hush money that kept the engine of deception running. The defense tried to reduce damage with technicalities, but prosecutors produced bank feeds and email chains. On the witness stand, Alexander testified calmly about the discovery of shell companies and the secret tape. He spoke of late nights, whistleblowers, and the moral obligation that forced him to bring truth forward. Emily listened and felt shame turn into something like reclamation, every sentence a step away from silence. The courtroom watched as details accumulated, signed checks, altered records, late-night transfers hidden abroad. The prosecution's arc was clear: pattern, proof, motive. The defense grew taut at each reveal. Finally, a surprise witness took the stand, a former executive who had flipped and provided critical documents. His affidavit detailed pressure from above to falsify figures and described meetings where loyalty trumped legality. Daniel slumped in his chair as the pages turned. His defense dwindled into a flicker of denials. The gallery held its breath. Emily squeezed Alexander's hand and whispered, "We made them listen." As the jurors retreated to deliberate, cameras swarmed and Vanessa's aides were led away in handcuffs. In the hallway, reporters shouted, lawyers shouted back, and the city held a pulse of expectation. Emily raised her eyes to Alexander, feeling the fragile, fierce lift of possibility in the moment. The judge would soon call the verdict. Outside, a storm gathered, but inside, something truer had begun. And as the doors closed for the day, a courthouse clerk carried one last envelope that would change everything. The envelope bore the seal of a federal agency and contained a ledger that mapped illicit transfers directly to Reed's inner circle. When the clerk handed it to the prosecutor, his face went pale and he motioned for a closed session. Inside that room, lawyers read names they had never seen and realized the scale of the corruption. The word conspiracy was spoken, and the legal strategy shifted from civil damage to criminal accountability. News feeds updated in real time. Reed Capital downfall, executives implicated, promises of indictments. Emily felt numb and then fiercely alive. The children at last had a shield built from truth and paper. Alexander squeezed her hand and said, "Justice begins now for them." The verdict hit the city like a shockwave. Every news channel replayed the same breaking headline: Daniel Reed found guilty on all counts. Fraud, coercion, abuse, obstruction. His empire had rotted from the inside, and now it was collapsing in public view. Inside the courtroom, the air felt heavier than ever. The judge's gavel struck once, echoing like thunder. "Mr. Reed, this court finds you guilty." Daniel's face drained of color. His lawyer whispered something desperate, but Daniel didn't hear. His gaze fixed on Emily sitting across the aisle, calm, composed, untouchable. For the first time, he realized she wasn't afraid of him anymore. Reporters flooded the courthouse steps, cameras flashing, microphones raised. "Emily, how does it feel to finally win?" She paused before answering. "This isn't about winning," she said softly. "It's about surviving, and making sure no woman ever feels powerless again." Behind her, Alexander stood quietly, hands clasped, watching the strength in her voice. He'd fought 100 boardroom battles, but nothing compared to watching this woman reclaim her dignity in front of the entire world. The next blow came fast. The Securities and Exchange Commission froze Reed Capital's assets. The company's stock plummeted overnight. Investors fled. By morning, the once glittering Reed Tower stood half empty, its glass walls reflecting a skyline that no longer belonged to Daniel Reed. At home, Alexander watched the live coverage on a muted screen while Emily held one of the babies, Little Hope, against her shoulder. The fire crackled softly behind them. "It's over," she whispered. "Not just over," Alexander said. "It's finished. Every account, every hidden fund, they'll all go to the trust now." The trust. That single word had become a lifeline. According to the court's decision and Daniel's late father's will, all assets of Reed Capital were to be transferred to the legal heirs, Hope, Noah, Liam, and Grace Reed, under their mother's guardianship. When the paperwork arrived, Emily stared at it for a long time, unable to process what it meant. The estate, the holdings, the accounts, all of it was now hers to manage for the children. "I never wanted his money," she said quietly. Alexander smiled faintly. "You didn't, but justice decided it belonged to those he tried to destroy." That evening, they attended a private meeting at the courthouse to finalize the terms. The judge looked at Emily over his glasses. "Miss Carter, you are hereby appointed as the legal guardian and sole custodian of the Reed heirs. The court also recognizes Mr. Alexander Heirs as secondary guardian, per your request." Emily turned to Alexander, surprised. "I didn't request that." He smiled gently. "Maybe I did." For a moment she couldn't speak. All she could do was nod, grateful tears filling her eyes. Across town, Daniel sat alone in a holding cell. Gone were the tailored suits and silver cufflinks, the walls were gray, the air stale. A television bolted to the corner replayed the same footage of Emily walking down the courthouse steps with Alexander beside her. Head high, unbroken. He lunged at the screen, shouting, "She ruined me!" A guard didn't even look up. "No, Reed, you ruined yourself." Outside the prison, storm clouds gathered over the city, but for Emily, the rain had finally stopped. She stood on the balcony of the Heirs mansion that night, the babies asleep inside. The moonlight glowed on the bay, calm and endless. Alexander joined her, holding 2 cups of tea. "You did it," he said. "We did it," she corrected, smiling. "You kept your promise." He looked out at the skyline, the same skyline that once belonged to men like Daniel Reed. "It was never about revenge," he said quietly. "It was about freedom." Emily leaned her head against his shoulder. "Then maybe it's time to start living again." And as dawn broke over San Francisco, the world that once belonged to Daniel Reed now belonged to the woman he tried to destroy and the man who taught her how to rise again. Weeks passed, and for the first time in years, Emily Carter's life wasn't measured in fear. The trial was over, the cameras were gone, and Daniel Reed was behind bars. The mansion on the hill, once a fortress against danger, had become a home. Outside, spring settled over San Francisco. Cherry blossoms bloomed along the iron gates of Pacific Heights, and sunlight poured through the tall glass windows. Inside, the sound of babies' laughter filled the halls like music. Emily sat in the nursery, gently rocking Grace while humming softly. Hope and Liam slept nearby in matching cribs, while Noah kicked his blanket off, demanding attention. She smiled, exhausted but happy. For the first time, she could exhale without trembling. No one was coming for them. No threats, no calls, no shadows at the gate. Just life, messy, loud, and beautifully ordinary. Alexander often worked from home now, preferring the chaos of baby giggles to boardroom noise. His sleek MacBook Pro rested beside a bottle warmer, the billionaire multitasking in ways his corporate peers would never imagine. That afternoon, he stood by the large bay window, phone in hand. Yes, Mason, he said calmly. Sell all remaining Reed Capital shares. Transfer the proceeds to the Little Hearts Foundation account. Emily looked up from the playmat. You're giving it away? He nodded. It was never ours to keep. It should build something, not rot like he did. She smiled softly. You sound more like a dreamer than a businessman. He turned, leaning against the frame. Maybe you turned me into one. The words caught her off guard. Her cheeks warmed, but she said nothing. That evening, they had dinner by the fire. Simple pasta, laughter, the clinking of baby bottles instead of champagne glasses. Emily watched Alexander feed Liam, awkward but determined. You're not bad at this, she teased. He raised an eyebrow. You'd be surprised? I've handled worse board members. They both laughed, and for a moment, the pain of the past seemed like another lifetime. Later, when the babies were asleep, Emily wandered into the music room. The grand piano gleamed under soft light. She hesitated, then pressed a single key. Its sound lingered, gentle and sad. Alexander entered quietly. You play? Not really, she said. But I used to sing. Before. She stopped, the rest of the sentence swallowed by memory. He approached slowly. Before he silenced you. She looked up at him, eyes shining. I don't want to be afraid of my own voice anymore. He smiled faintly. Then sing. At first, her voice was shaky, fragile as glass. But as she continued, it grew steady, warm, full, alive. Alexander stood still, his heart tightening. The same woman who had once stood in the rain, broken and terrified, now filled his home with sound. When she finished, tears glistened on his lashes. You brought life back into this house, he whispered. Emily looked down, voice trembling. You brought life back into me. He reached out, brushing a stray lock of hair from her face. You've always had it, Emily. You just needed someone to remind you. For a moment, the world went still. Two survivors, standing inches apart, surrounded by the echoes of a melody that belonged only to them. She smiled through tears. Maybe healing isn't about forgetting. Maybe it's about finding peace in the people who stayed. He nodded slowly. And I'm not going anywhere. The fireplace crackled, warm light dancing across their faces. Outside, the city lights shimmered below like stars scattered on water. And as Emily placed her hand over his, she realized that love wasn't the thing she'd lost. It was the thing waiting for her all along, patient as the dawn. It was a crisp afternoon in late May, when Alexander Hayes decided to do something he hadn't done in years. Buy flowers himself. Not for a deal, not for condolences, but for hope. He chose white roses, Isabella's favorite once upon a time, and pale pink peonies, because that was the color Emily always wore when she smiled. The Hayes mansion had transformed over the months. Laughter echoed through its long hallways. Toys cluttered the marble floor that had once felt too perfect. The ghosts were gone. In their place were 4 tiny lives, each with eyes that mirrored Emily's courage. That morning, Emily had been in the garden, kneeling among the tulips with Grace in her arms. The sun warmed her skin, and the scent of lavender drifted through the air. She didn't hear Alexander's footsteps at first, only the soft crunch of gravel before his voice broke the silence. You're up early, he said. She looked over her shoulder, smiling. The babies woke me up. I thought a little sunshine might help. He watched her for a long moment. There was something about her, something that didn't belong to tragedy or survival anymore. She looked peaceful, whole. Emily, he said finally, his tone quiet but deliberate. There's something I've wanted to tell you. She turned to face him, confused but curious. What is it? He reached into his pocket, pulling out a small velvet box. For a heartbeat, Emily forgot to breathe. Alexander. He opened it, revealing a delicate diamond ring, simple but breathtaking. Before you say anything, he began, voice trembling slightly. I know you've already been through a lifetime's worth of pain. I know you swore you'd never let another man define your future. And I don't want to. I just want to share it with you. Her eyes filled with tears. When Isabella died, he continued, I thought the best parts of me died with her. I was wrong. You brought them back. You brought light back into this house, into my life, and I don't want a single day without you in it. He took a breath. Emily Carter, will you marry me? The world seemed to stop. The only sounds were the soft chirping of birds and the faint hum of the city below. Emily covered her mouth with trembling hands. Alexander, she whispered, tears falling freely now. You don't have to save me anymore. He smiled gently. I'm not saving you, Emily. I'm asking you to save me." For a moment, her mind flashed through every memory. The rain, the fear, the nights she cried alone. And now, this man standing before her, not demanding, not rescuing, but choosing her. She stepped closer, her voice breaking. "Yes." He froze, barely believing it. "Yes?" She nodded through tears. "Yes, 1,000 times, yes." Alexander slipped the ring onto her finger, his hands shaking. The diamond caught the afternoon sun, scattering light across her face. She threw her arms around him, laughing through tears, and he held her like he was anchoring himself to the world again. From the balcony above, Mason and the nanny quietly watched, both pretending not to wipe their eyes. Later, as the babies giggled in their playpen, Emily and Alexander walked hand in hand through the garden. The wind carried the smell of roses, and the city skyline shimmered in the distance. "Do you think they'll remember this day?" she asked, glancing at the children. "Maybe not," he said, smiling. "But they'll grow up surrounded by the love that started here." She leaned her head against his shoulder. "Then let's make sure it lasts." He kissed her forehead softly. "It already will." And as the sun dipped behind the hills, Emily realized something she had never dared to believe. Her story wasn't about survival anymore. It was about finally coming home. The morning of the wedding broke bright and golden, sunlight shimmering across the waters of San Francisco Bay. The ceremony was set in the garden of the Ritz-Carlton, overlooking the endless blue horizon. White orchids and pale pink roses, Emily's favorite, lined the aisle, their petals swaying gently in the ocean breeze. Guests began to arrive, family, friends, journalists who had followed her story from scandal to salvation. Everyone whispered the same thing: that this wasn't just a wedding, it was a miracle. In the bridal suite upstairs, Emily stood before the mirror, her heart thundering. Her gown was soft ivory silk, flowing and simple. She didn't want diamonds or extravagance, just peace. Around her neck hung the same pendant Alexander had given her months ago, engraved with "Protected by Grace." Her maid of honor, a quiet nurse who had cared for her during the pregnancy, fastened the final button. "You look beautiful," she whispered. Emily smiled faintly. "I never thought I'd wear white again, not after everything." The nurse shook her head. "You earned this, Emily, every bit of it." Downstairs, Alexander adjusted his tie in the reflection of a window overlooking the bay. Mason stood beside him, unusually serious. "You nervous, boss?" Alexander laughed softly. "More than I've ever been in my life. I've closed billion-dollar deals with steadier hands than this." Mason clapped him on the shoulder. "You deserve this. So does she." The music began, a soft string quartet version of "Can't Help Falling in Love." Guests rose to their feet as Emily appeared at the top of the garden stairs, the sunlight turning her veil into a halo. She walked slowly, every step a goodbye to the life she'd survived and a welcome to the one she'd chosen. When she reached the altar, Alexander's breath caught. For a moment, neither could speak. The priest smiled knowingly. "I believe you two have already said everything that needed saying," he murmured, and the crowd laughed softly. The vows were simple, heartfelt, and raw. Alexander took her hands. "Emily, you were the storm that broke my silence, the fire that brought warmth back into my home. You gave me back a reason to live, not as a billionaire, but as a man who finally understands what love means." Tears filled her eyes. "Alexander, you taught me that love isn't about saving someone. It's about standing beside them, even when the world burns around you. You found me when I was lost, and you saw the woman I had forgotten I could be." Their voices trembled, but their eyes held steady. When the priest declared, "You may kiss the bride," the world seemed to pause. As Alexander kissed her, the audience erupted in applause. Flashbulbs sparkled like stars. Emily laughed through tears, holding his face between her hands. The babies, seated in their stroller nearby, gurgled as if joining the celebration. After the ceremony, they shared a quiet moment on the terrace overlooking the bay. The city skyline shimmered in the distance, the sun dipping low, painting the sky in gold. "Do you ever think about how we got here?" she asked softly. "Every day," he said. "Sometimes I still wake up and think it's a dream." Emily smiled. "Then promise me this, no matter what comes, we never let fear back into our home." He touched her cheek gently. "I promise." Later, as laughter and music filled the evening air, Emily looked around at the life she'd built, not the luxury, not the power, but the peace. Hope, Noah, Liam, and Grace were passed from guest to guest, adored and celebrated. The world called them heirs. Emily simply called them miracles. And when fireworks lit up the night sky above the bay, Emily turned to Alexander, her husband, and whispered, "We finally made it." And beneath the glittering light, surrounded by love and laughter, the woman who had once been thrown into the storm finally danced in the sunlight, free, unbroken, and forever home. Summer arrived in San Francisco with gentle wind and clear skies. The garden at the Heirs mansion bloomed brighter than ever, alive with the laughter of children and the hum of bees drifting among lavender rows. For Emily and Alexander, every day since the wedding felt like borrowed light. Fragile, precious, earned. That morning, Emily sat on the terrace with a cup of coffee, watching the twins chase bubbles Mason blew into the air. "They're getting faster," she said, smiling. Alexander, beside her, nodded, scribbling something on his Mont Blanc notepad. "Give them a year," he said, "and they'll outrun you." Peace had become routine. But peace has a way of drawing shadows. Just before noon, Mason's phone buzzed. He stepped aside, listening, his expression tightening. "Sir?" he said quietly. "We have a problem." Alexander looked up. "What kind?" "Reed," Mason replied. "He's out." The words hung in the air like a sudden crack of thunder. Emily froze. "What do you mean out?" Mason exhaled. "Early release. Some technicality in the sentencing. A retrial motion was granted on one count. He's not cleared, but he's free, for now." Emily's cup slipped from her hands, shattering against the stone. "He can't come near us," she whispered. "He can't." Alexander was already on his feet, his voice calm but sharp. "He won't. Mason, double the security. New locks, more guards, 24-hour rotation." That night, sleep refused to come. Emily lay awake, every creak of the house sounding like footsteps. At 3 a.m. she wandered into the nursery. The babies slept peacefully, their faces soft in the moonlight. She touched Grace's tiny hand and whispered, "Mommy won't let him hurt you." Behind her, Alexander's reflection appeared in the window. He placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "He'll try to scare you," he said softly. "That's all he has left." But deep down, neither believed that was all. 2 days later, a black envelope arrived at the gate. No return address, no name. Inside was a single photograph. Emily in her wedding gown holding the children. Across the image, scrawled in red ink, were 3 words. "This isn't over." Emily dropped the picture, her breath catching. Alexander took it silently, eyes darkening with cold fury. "He's testing us," he said. "Seeing if we'll break." She shook her head. "I won't run again." He met her gaze. "Good, because this time, he's the one who'll fall." That evening, Alexander made calls to contacts in law enforcement and private security. He even reached out to a former FBI associate. "If he so much as steps near this property," he said, "I want to know before he breathes the air around it." Still, anxiety clung to the house. Emily tried to stay strong, but fear crept in like fog. She found herself checking the locks 3 times before bed, flinching when her phone buzzed. Then came the moment that froze her blood. One afternoon, while she was walking the babies in the garden, a shadow moved near the fence. A man in a baseball cap lingered by the trees, camera in hand. When she called out, he vanished. By the time Mason reached the spot, all that remained was a business card wedged between the fence slats, embossed with the initials DR. That night, Alexander held her close as she trembled. "He wants you afraid," he murmured, "but fear is the only weapon he's got left. And I'll take that from him too." Emily buried her face against his chest. "Promise me this ends." He tightened his arms around her. "I promise. Whatever it takes." Outside, lightning flashed across the bay, reflecting off the mansion's glass walls. The storm had returned, only this time, Emily wasn't the one standing in the rain. And as thunder rolled through the night, the man who once tried to destroy her was about to learn what happens when you threaten a woman who has already survived the fire. 3 nights after the photograph arrived, the air around the Heirs mansion grew thick with tension. Security lights burned through the darkness. Mason's men patrolled every corner of the estate. The gates, once a symbol of protection, now felt like the walls of a fortress preparing for war. Emily barely slept. Every whisper of wind, every branch tapping the windows sent her heart racing. Alexander tried to hide his worry, but she could see it in the way his jaw clenched whenever his phone buzzed. He wasn't afraid for himself. He was afraid for her. That evening, as the sun dipped behind the San Francisco skyline, Mason entered the library with a file. "Sir," he said grimly, "we've confirmed it. Reed hired someone, an ex-con named Travis Holt, surveillance expert known for blackmail jobs. He's been spotted near the property twice." Alexander's eyes narrowed. "Then it's time we stop waiting for him to make the first move." Emily looked up. "What do you mean?" He set his MacBook Pro on the table, pulling up blueprints of the estate. "We'll lure him in, let him believe he's won, but every step he takes will be recorded. Every threat, every word, evidence that will bury him for good." Mason nodded. "I'll have the tech team ready tonight." Emily hesitated. "You're using me as bait?" Alexander turned toward her, his voice gentle but firm. "No, I'm using his obsession against him. You'll be safe, I promise." She wanted to argue, but she knew it was the only way. She took a deep breath. "Then let's finish this." By midnight, the house was silent. Emily sat in the dimly lit living room, dressed in a simple white sweater. The babies were asleep upstairs under a guard's watch. A storm brewed outside, wind shaking the trees, rain streaking against the windows. In the control room, Alexander watched the live feeds. Every angle of the property glowed on the monitors. Gates, hallways, garden paths. Mason stood beside him, headset on. "North camera's picking movement," he muttered. On the screen, a shadow slipped past the outer wall. Alexander's pulse quickened. "He's here." Emily heard the faint creak of the back door. She froze, pretending not to notice, clutching the pendant at her neck. A figure stepped from the darkness. Tall, wearing a hood, eyes glinting with rage. "Hello, Emily," Daniel Reed sneered. "You really thought prison could keep me from you?" Her voice was steady. "You shouldn't be here, Daniel." "Oh, I should," he spat. "You took everything. My company, my life, my name. But I'm taking something back." He pulled a small camera from his pocket. "One photo of you begging for forgiveness, and I'll destroy your perfect little family." From the control room, Alexander leaned forward. "Now," he whispered. Emily lifted her chin. "You won't hurt me again." He smirked. "And who's going to stop me?" "Me," came the voice behind him. Daniel spun around. Alexander stood in the doorway, rain dripping from his coat, a calm fury in his eyes. Behind him, 2 security guards stepped in, guns drawn. Daniel tried to bolt, but Mason was already there, blocking his path. Alexander's voice was low, deadly. "You wanted attention, Daniel. Congratulations. You're live on 12 security feeds, audio and visual. Every word you just said is being transmitted to the DA's office." Daniel's face went white. "You set me up." Alexander stepped closer. "No, Daniel. You set yourself up. I just turned on the lights." When police sirens flashed across the gate, Emily finally exhaled. Daniel lunged one last time, shouting her name, but Mason tackled him to the ground. Officers dragged him away, his screams fading into the storm. Emily turned to Alexander, trembling. "It's really over this time, isn't it?" He reached for her hand. "Yes," he said softly. "You're free." She collapsed into his arms, tears and rain mingling on her face. "You promised you'd protect us," she whispered. He smiled faintly. "And I keep my promises." Outside, lightning cracked over the bay, washing the mansion in silver light. Inside, for the first time in years, Emily felt the weight lift completely. The storm had passed, and as Daniel Reed was driven away in handcuffs, Emily finally understood. Some battles aren't won by running or hiding. They're won by standing tall in the light and refusing to break again. The storm that ended Daniel Reed's reign gave way to the most peaceful dawn San Francisco had seen in months. The sky blushed with shades of gold and coral, the bay below glimmering like glass. For the first time, Emily Carter woke up without fear shadowing her heart. The mansion felt different now, lighter, alive. The scent of fresh coffee drifted through the halls, mingling with baby laughter. Downstairs, Hope clapped her tiny hands while Noah tried to grab Alexander's tie, babbling triumphantly. Liam and Grace rolled on the blanket near the fireplace, their giggles filling the air like music. Emily stood at the window in a soft white robe, the pendant at her neck catching the morning light. She watched Alexander crouch on the floor, pretending to lose a battle with his children. He was a billionaire, yet he looked happier covered in baby toys than he ever had at a board meeting. "Morning, Mrs. Hayes," he said, looking up with a grin. She laughed softly. "You're teaching them bad habits." "Confidence," he corrected. "They're going to rule the world someday." She crossed the room and kissed his forehead. "Let them be children first." For a while, they simply existed in that quiet, perfect morning. The fear, the trials, the whispers, all gone. What remained was a family built from pain, love, and second chances. Later, while the children napped, Emily and Alexander walked through the garden, hand in hand. The roses were in full bloom again, white and pink, swaying gently in the breeze. She knelt to touch one of the blossoms. "You know," she said softly, "I used to think survival was the end of the story. But it's not. It's just the beginning." Alexander smiled. "Then what's the next chapter?" She looked up at him, eyes glowing. Life. Real life. Raising them to be kind, brave, and unafraid. He reached into his jacket pocket and handed her a sealed envelope. "Then you'll need this." She frowned, curious, and opened it. Inside was a deed to a new property overlooking the cliffs at Carmel by the sea. "Alexander?" she whispered. "What is this?" "Our next beginning," he said. "Somewhere away from the city. No reporters, no noise, just us." Tears welled in her eyes. "You think we deserve that kind of peace?" He touched her cheek. "You earned it." That evening, they hosted a quiet dinner for close friends and the people who had stood by them. Mason, Dr. Hart, a few members of the legal team. Laughter filled the grand dining room. Glasses clinked, stories were shared. When it was Emily's turn to speak, she stood, holding her glass. "I used to believe that my story ended the night I was thrown out into the rain," she began, her voice steady but full of emotion. "But now I know it was just where my real life began. To anyone who's ever been told they're not enough, don't believe it. You're stronger than you think. And sometimes the storm isn't there to destroy you. It's there to wash everything clean." Applause broke out. Even Mason, usually stoic, smiled. After dinner, as the last guests left, Emily and Alexander stepped onto the terrace. The city lights shimmered below like a sea of stars. He wrapped his arms around her. "Are you happy?" She nodded, leaning against him. "Completely. For the first time, I'm not afraid of tomorrow." He kissed her hair softly. "Tomorrow's already yours." The sound of the ocean whispered in the distance, mingling with the faint cries of their children waking upstairs. Emily smiled. "Duty calls," she said, laughing. Alexander took her hand. "Let's answer together." They walked back inside, where warmth and laughter waited, not the fragile kind that fades with morning, but the kind built from survival, forgiveness, and love that had weathered every storm. And as the sun rose higher over the bay, Emily Carter Hayes knew she had finally won. Not by revenge or riches, but by reclaiming her life and proving that even the darkest nights end with light. So, that's how the story ends, my dear friends. You're still here, aren't you? If you've stayed with us all the way to this moment, it means something in Emily's journey has touched your heart. Maybe because you've been through your own storms too. Life isn't about never falling. It's about standing up, softer but stronger, every single time. Like the Stoic philosopher Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "The obstacle is the way." Every pain, every betrayal, every sleepless night can be the bridge that carries us toward peace if we choose not to let it break us. Emily's story reminds us that healing isn't loud. It's quiet, it's gentle, and it begins the moment we decide to forgive ourselves for surviving. So if you're still fighting your own battles, take a breath. You're not broken, you're becoming. And now, if this story made you feel even a spark of hope, please give it a like, share it with someone who needs strength tonight, and don't forget to subscribe. Because here, we don't just tell stories, we heal together, one heartbeat at a time.